If you haven't figured it out yet, what I'm going to demo today for you guys is a rat. I've been sculpting the rats for the last few months or so they still feel a little new to me. I've been working on the mice for many, many years, and you would think that going from mouse to rat is kind of just an easy next step of going a little bit bigger, but the rats are a lot different. Not just because they're bigger, but because they're a completely different animal. They seem very similar, but the proportions, the size, their personalities are a lot different. So I think about that when I'm sculpting them too. So I work a little bit different than what you might be used to. I'm gonna kind of go in and out of the kiln with the pieces I go, and in between I'm gonna do some in-between stuff, talking about the little details and things like that. So I'm just gonna get started. I almost forgot. I really like to wear one of these like kind of snug leather gloves on my left hand because I don't want to get burned. And it makes me have a better grip on this too. It's pretty heavy. So I'm going to start by putting a bridge on here. And usually when people use bridges, they're using bridges for holding onto a piece when you're assembling, so you can work in that seal really well without the attachment like moving and shifting around. But here I use bridges a little bit different. I'm using the bridge as a way to hold on to the piece and keep it firm while I get like big forms and gestures, which I'll do on the next heat. The first time I saw bridges was actually in a class I took with Sally, I don't know where she is, years ago at Penland. And the guy sitting next to me was a scientific flame worker, and he had made this like really big crab piece, and every single leg he put on, he bridged up, and I had never seen anything like that before, so it like totally blew my mind and completely changed the way that I work. And then later, my husband Dave, who you guys all know already, he showed me how to make like a two-part Sherlock, which I'm sure a lot of you know about. And when you work in that seal and completely work out those two connections to get like a really big, elegant curve, that was another thing that kind of blew my mind. And I put those two things together, and that's how I came up with how to do these shapes and forms. So I'm using an 8mm rod here because I want it to be nice and strong, because this piece again is pretty heavy. Generally when I'm using a bridge, I don't use 8mm unless I need to. I'll usually use like a 6mm just because it will heat up and bend over faster. I love when a bridge part will kind of just perfectly match up. And I want to make sure whenever I'm using bridges, they're really nice, strong hot seals. That's satisfyingly matched up. I like that. So I'm making sure it's a really nice hot seal. I don't want it to crack and break on me later. The last thing you want to worry about is the thing that, you know, is trying to keep you from worrying and giving you support. I'm gonna work that side in. And then I'm gonna go back in over here. So I want to use my hand torch. I have a hornet tip on this torch here. I'm gonna work in that seal to make sure it's a nice, safe hot seal, so it's not gonna crack on me later. Hand torches were something that for a long time I also didn't have, so it was a big game changer for me when I got some. I use them a lot. All right, that looks pretty good. So I'm gonna put this in the kiln for a few minutes because I wanna talk to you guys a little about my prep work and how I got this. You notice when we pass it, always grab it below my hand. Mass art students. All right, so I'm gonna shut this off for a second. So it took me a while to figure out how to get the piece set up for the racks. It was so much bigger than I was used to. And for a minute I didn't have this size white tubing. This is the import white, and I was using something smaller and like gathering it up, but I wasn't doing a great job, so the wall thickness was kind of all over the place. And then I so luckily have an amazing husband that got us some lathes for the studio, which was a game changer for this, because now I can take this big heavy tubing, chuck it up in the lathe, and crunch it down to the size that I need. And then, so this is just a little sample of it, but I start with a piece that's 10 inches long. That took some trial and error to figure out like what size and length that I wanted. I tried 8 inches, 12 inches. It come out to be that 10 inches was the perfect amount of tubing to get that size rat, which is a little bit bigger than the rats you're used to. And then I crunched that down to make it a little bit thicker and shorter. And then I want to cover it in clear frit, which was kind of this awesome happy accident I figured out when I was sculpting the mice. I found that when I was doing a lot of detail work on them, this white would kind of boil and get a little weird on the surface. So I wanted to make that smoother. So I wanted to cover it in clear. And I found that if I just went in some clear frit, and I'm using small frit, it gave it a really awesome subtle texture on the surface that people always ask me how I do that, and it was an accidental discovery that I love. So I'm gonna pass around the sample for you guys to see. The ends of that one are a little bit sharp, so watch out for that. So to get the frit on that big ass piece of prep that I have in, sorry, just swearing, the big piece I have in the lathe, I was struggling to get it on there. I would take it out and then take one of the tubes off one side, bring it to the bench, and it was really heavy and hard to do, so I kind of imagined the tool to make that happen. I don't know if this tool exists or anyone have heard of it before, and I don't know if Jared, Boston Distillery, is here yet, but he made this tool for me. I was talking with him and Dave about what I needed to make it happen. I didn't want to take the piece out of the lathe to get the frit on it, so I put all the frit inside here. I'll torch an area and bring this up into it and then pull it away and melt it all in. I've been calling this tool the Frit Master 2000. I don't know if it has a real name, but that's what I've been calling it. It's pretty great. So I don't know if Jared is, but thank you, Jared. Thanks. All right. Cool. So I'm going to grab that piece back out for me. Thank you. All right, so the first thing I want to do to get the shape going is I want to build up some heat, and maybe like the last 3/4 of it towards the pipe. And I'm not thinking too much now about the direction I'm holding it for how gravity is going to affect it yet. I just start by building up some heat in there. Not getting that bridge hot, because again, I want that to be nice and stable. And I'm also not hitting over here with the flame, because I find with this import white, it doesn't love clear. If it's going to crack and break anywhere, it's going to be at the place where it's connected to clear. So I kind of pull that a little bit further away, so I know that I'm not like flashing it with the flame when I don't want to. So I'm building up some heat here, and then once I see some color building up, it's almost there, I'm going to start to let gravity get the shape that I'm going for. What I don't want to do is get this so hot that the wall thickness starts to like move and shift around and start to get thick in spots. I'm trying to get more of like, those of you that are my students outside of here, I always call it like a wiggly heat. I don't want it to like get all gathery and liquidy. I just want it to start to like wiggle and move a little bit. When I've done a lot of like kiln work, like slumping and fusing and stuff, it made me think about how glass moves a little bit differently as well. It can kind of just like relax into a shape. You can kind of already see it start to go. The thing I'm paying attention to the most right now is I want to get that back curve, but I also want to get this area to be kind of flat there, so it's a good prep spot for where the tail is going to go later. Which to me is one of the hardest parts, like getting the tail on, because it's the very last thing that I do, and it's the easiest thing to mess up. So I'm just taking my time, letting it fall out a little bit. I'm might give it a little puff here and there just to kind of keep the width there, but the main thing I'm going for is that back curve. And when I'm adding the heat here, I'm really paying attention to what's getting hot. Like I see that this part's dropping out more, so I'm gonna not give that spot so much heat anymore. And even if it does kind of go too far, I can fix it later, so it's not a big deal. And I think sometimes when we're sculpting, we forget to switch hands. And it's important to heat whatever you do on one side, do on the other side. And to look from this direction. Getting there. So usually when I sculpt these wreaths, I'm pretty finicky about it. I'm not going to be quite as finicky today because I only got 2 hours, which I'm sure will go by very quick. Sorry, so I got that kind of big gesture. So the next thing I'm going to do is work out the sides a little bit. So I got the profile going. So now I'm going to give him a little bit of side belly. A nice gentle heat. Again, whatever I do to one side, I'm going to do to the other. And I also keep in mind that like I just heated that first side and now I'm coming to heat the second one. That first one's still pretty hot. It's looking pretty good. I'm going to puff out the under his belly a little bit too because it dropped out a little bit further than I wanted it to. I'm careful not to hit the flame on my bridge too much. If I do, it just kind of goes through the flame really quickly. Right. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to get the little puffs for the thighs. When I'm doing something like that, I think about which is the easier side to sculpt, and I start with the harder one. Because if the easier one is going to be easier to match to the harder one than the other way around. Does that make sense? And when I used to first start sculpting the mice, I would just kind of heat a spot and blow it out. But now I have learned a little bit more about the anatomy, and I try to find like where the joint starts and which way the knee is going. So I'm not just going to heat it and kind of blow it out wherever. I'm going to heat it and blow it out, pointing it down, knowing that this is the highest spot of that curve. And again, I can always go back and fix stuff later. And you can see there I saw the curve and I liked it, but I wanted a little bit more. So while I still had heat, I went back in and got it hot again. I always tell my students it's easier to get hot glass hotter than it is to make cold glass hot again. So if I can make that decision quick on the fly, it's going to work better than if I let it get cold and do it again. This is the hard part, making two things match. It's important to look from every single angle that you can. All right, it's looking pretty good. I'm just going to touch up the bottom a little bit, knowing that I need it to be prepped for where that tail goes later. Like I said, that's always been like one of the biggest struggles with these pieces because it's the very last thing I do, so I try to really keep that in mind as I'm sculpting. All right, so this has been out of the kiln for a while, and again, like I mentioned before, I use the kiln kind of like you would use a glory hole. I use it as a tool for reheating. So instead of me going to build up heat back over here, it's It's going to want to crack there, it's going to want to crack there, anywhere where the clear meets up with that white. So I'm going to have Alex kindly put that back in the kiln for me. All right, so I want to show you guys a little bit about reference images. So when, I don't need that one. So when I'm first sculpting a piece, the first thing I do is I'll just try to learn everything I can about it. Again, I was already sculpting mice, so I had an idea about rodents and I looked at them a lot, and I always really liked rats, but I never had rats as a pet. So I printed out a ton of pictures, and I always have these on my desk with me. And I brought just some of them. I usually have a lot more, and yes, it is sort of a safety hazard because they're paper and can light on fire, but I think it's a risk worth taking for me anyway. So I kind of keep them further away from where they can get lit up. And I usually will, this one's kind of a mess, but you can see I like draw all over them too, so I can start to understand what's underneath it. I also, on Instagram, I feel like a lot of our Instagrams are just like filled with glass and looking at all of each other's work and what we're doing. But my Instagram right now is completely full of rats, and there's a little bit of glass mixed in. So whatever I'm looking at and studying, I'll follow those hashtags and I'll start to follow people. I found a really cool app on my iPad that's like rat anatomy, and you can peel away each like layer, and that's been really helpful too. I bought a rat skeleton that just lives on my desk, so I can look at it and live with it and just start to try to understand it. And it sounds like I know a lot about rat anatomy, but I don't. I just try really hard. It's what's tricky about mammals is their anatomy is underneath all this like fur and fat, and especially rodents, like they can probably fit in a space that big because all their bones are kind of squishy. So that's something to consider too. So the other thing that I do that actually Dave really taught me early on when we first met was if I can't sculpt what I want to sculpt out of clay, how do I expect to be able to make it out of glass? I didn't bring any of my clay models here, and I wouldn't say any of my clay models are perfectly finished or anything I would call, they look nothing like that, but I start with a wire armature and then I build on it with oil-based clay, so then I can keep using that clay over and over again and shift the sculpture as I go. And I'll have that nearby as well, because then I can think about scale, proportion, position, because with a lot of these, their positions, I'm trying to make them more dynamic and not just straightforward. Like some of the earlier ones, like this one's kind of an earlier one, and so is this one. I keep their positions really straight and simple, and then as I go, I try to give them a little bit more motion and life, but it's really tricky to do on the fly. So if I have that clay model, I can move it around and think about where that animal moves from and how those bones and muscles do move and where things would puff up and not puff up and what looks right and what looks wrong. And I think one of the other hardest decisions about that too is what part of the anatomy do you want to include everything? Because you don't want to include everything. I think one of the best things of being an artist is you can make those decisions. You can add stuff or take away stuff. So I tend to try to take away stuff and keep just the things that I like. You can see on these two guys, they have like really detailed whiskers, because I thought it would be an awesome idea to like drill in every single one of these whiskers with a little sintered bit. And I like it, but I don't love it, so I'm not going to do that again because I feel like it's too much detail. So I want to like simplify and make them a lot cleaner and simpler. Yeah. See my notes real quick. Oh, the other thing I find really helpful with sculpting animals or whatever you're doing is go to the craft store and get those little like plastic animals. I have a big bin full of those toys. They're really helpful. They're not always anatomically correct, but it's a good start of something to have 3D on your desk. Don't just Google images, a picture, and open your phone and use that. You know, Kaylee. You need to print out the pictures and hang them up all around so you have them to look at. Cool. I think that's good. I'll take that out of the kiln. I usually leave in the kiln a little bit longer, so kind of pushing it. Usually when I'm working too, I'll work on like a few things at once. I'd go in the kiln a lot.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, if I wasn't doing a demo, if I would keep going in and out of the kiln like this, yes. Except usually I'm working on like more than one rat at a time, or I might put it in the kiln and work on something else for a little while. We run a studio that isn't just, you know, us on torches, so there's always a ton of stuff to do. I wish I could say my job was just all on the torch, but it's not. All right, so I am going to bring this up a little bit more because it has been out of the kiln. And I made notes here, and I do this like not just for demos, but step by step for myself, so I can understand. Like, I figured out a lot of stuff the last few times I made stuff, and then I'll refine my notes as I go because I might change my process too. All right, so one of the things I just started doing on the last few rats is I was noticing I had issues with having enough material for those front arms to pull out and be thick enough. So what I started doing is this amount of glass here, if you guys can see that like hump there, that's kind of like in this area on the rat. I'm gonna heat that up and kind of shift it down so I have some more mass and material for the front legs. So this is kind of like that in-between heat of it being liquidy and it being just wiggly. I want it to move and shift, but what I don't want is it to like change the wall thickness too much. So hot glass will only flow into more hot glass, right? So I'm making sure to heat a wide area so that hot glass has somewhere to flow into. So now that I get a good heat base going, now I'm going to start holding it in the direction I want it to fall. The front arms, well, I did say the tail was the hardest part, but the front arms are pretty hard too. Because I personally have a hard time like understanding the shoulder blades. They're such like an interesting, crazy part of our anatomy on humans and all mammals, I think. They just move in such interesting ways. I don't think I fully understand. Maybe someday. So I see that start to shift down a little bit. I'm gonna give it a little puff. So I moved that down just a little bit. And when I am working on stuff like this, I will sometimes pause and take pictures so I know that, okay, this is what it should look like at this point. Or this is what I did this time because I'm trying maybe trying something new. But then I do always pause. That's something I do in between when it's in the kiln too, is I'll take notes on what I did so I don't forget. You think you'll remember, but no. It's important to take notes. All right. So I got that material shifted down a bit. And this rat's actually a pretty good size, but those ones are actually a bit bigger too. Alright, so my next step is I'm going to remove the bridge. It did its job for me, so now it can go. Something else I learned is after you cut off a bridge like that, always polish the bridge post. I totally tore up our kiln mat by not doing that really well. That was me, sorry. So I won't do that again. Always polish that up. I'm going to get this little chunk of clear off the end of the face. And then I like to give it a little extra dip in the clear again, the clear frit that I use to cover the whole body. Sometimes the end doesn't get it as much. And the face is the face. It needs to be really good. So I think it's important to make sure it doesn't boil or get all weird. All right, it's starting to look like a rat, right? So even now, I'm going to start sculpting the head, but I'm not going to do too much, but I'm going to do enough that it helps me see the whole picture. It's really tempting at this point to try and get in a bunch of details. And I'm not doing much, I'm kind of just letting heat and gravity get that profile for me. And also what I'm doing is I kind of have an idea in my mind of like what position I want it to be in. It's going to be similar to the one that's standing way on the left with one paw up. I keep telling you guys about all the things that are really hard about this, saying it's the hardest thing, but I have another hardest thing. It's getting all the feet to touch the ground at the same time. So with the first few rats I did, I knew that from the mice going in. So I was like, okay, the first one I'm going to sculpt, I'm going to do standing on his hind legs, which posed its own issues. But making 2 feet and a tail touch is easier than all 4 feet and a tail. So I didn't do much blowing or anything here. I just kind of let gravity do the majority of the work for me. I'm going to start to get the shape of the top of the head. When I use the tools when I'm blowing, it's more like I'm not really pushing with them at this point. I'm kind of cooling off the glass with it so it doesn't puff out in those spots. All right, so before I go and start puffing things out a little bit more, I want to map things out so I can see like where the head is and where the jawline is. So I'll do a lot where I kind of make little marks that I can easily get rid of if they're wrong. You see it's a really like light mark that I might put in later if I decide that mark was right, but I might also get rid of it if I decide it's wrong. When sculpting clay, you can do that really easily, and that's something I learned when I was sculpting with clay a lot, and I wanted to do that in glass, and I find it really helpful. So start light, because you can always erase it if you do. It's harder to erase a really like hard carved line. So it's getting there. It's looking pretty good. And this tool comes in a pack of 5 for $1.25 at the dollar store, or the $1.25 store now. And it's pretty great. So now that I got that jawline mapped out, I'm gonna heat up each cheek and puff it out. And as I puff it out, I'm gonna like kind of push down this way so it gets a little bit of like a jowl, I wanna call it. And I kind of did a no-no here where I'm starting with the side that's easier, but that's okay. This is one of my favorite moves with hollow sculpting, is when you can heat and blow and push and move material around like this. You can kind of see, I might exaggerate it just so you guys can see it better. It kind of gets that nice curve there. I'll make it a little bit more so you guys can see it better. See how I get that really nice cheek right there? So now to do that same thing on the other side, which is tricky, but I'm going to start by holding it in the same direction I was heating on the other side. But it's going to be really hard to do this way because I am not at all ambidextrous. I'm very much a righty. So I start here and I try to make up for the gravity. And again, it's easier to get hot glass hotter, so I kind of make that decision right away and go in and heat and do more. And I want to look from every single direction that I can. I feel like sometimes we forget to look this way. but that's an important direction to look from. This is actually one of my favorite tools too. I got this when I took a class with Lauren Stump years ago. It's my most favorite paddle. All right, so I got those little cheeks out. So now I'm gonna use what most of you recognize as a bowl push, but I'm gonna use this as a way to kind of like burnish that underside of his chin, which will make his cheeks look even cuter and give that little like sucked in area there. There's no bone there, there's not much muscle there. So I'm starting to see it, and I see that I got the head and I got the back, but I don't have much of a shoulder situation here, and the shoulders are really subtle. So I'm gonna flame anneal this a little bit, or bring it up, whatever you wanna call it, make it a little bit hotter back here, push that heat back a little and puff out that area just a little bit. I feel like with sculpting, I want it to be that linear process like a lot of stuff is in hot glass, especially in the hot shop, or if you're making like blown forms, where you can go A, B, C, D and get to the end, but it's not really like that. It can kind of be like that, and that's why I take a lot of notes, but as you go, each piece is gonna be totally different, and if I try to change even the smallest thing, like I wanna lift up the left hand instead of the right hand, it's different now. Or if my prep work was like, you know, an inch shorter this time, or a little bit thicker, or more tapered, I have to work with that, which I don't mind because every wrap's different, right? So I don't want this to be like a really abrupt line, I want it to be nice and soft. So that's a little more abrupt than I want it, but it's okay because after I get out of the kiln on the next one, I'm gonna come back here and puff that out more because I really like this curve to be even more dramatic, even if it's not, you know, anatomically correct. I think it looks cool. So one of my favorite moves, which is maybe one of the detail moves that I don't need to do right now, but I'm gonna do it anyway, is to use a punty rod. And in hot glass, I was taught to call this a puntito or a puntetto, when you use another rod or a punty to pull out glass rather than use it as a handle. So I'm going to heat up this nose here. And I'm going to grab a little bit further back than I think. And as I grab it, I'm going to puff and pull a little. That kind of gives me that nice top curve and that little nose. Their noses have like a little ledge that they're under, kind of. The more you look at your reference images, the more you see tiny details that maybe you didn't see before. Make sure. Cool. Before I put it in the kiln, I'm going to give it a once over and make sure it's looking like I want it to look. Looking pretty good. Thank you. All right. So the ears. I think that's one part that I've gotten a lot of questions about, is how do I make those ears? I don't know who was here last year and saw Sally's demo when she did the flower, and she blew a bubble and tore it apart to get the really beautiful thin petals. Oh, thanks, Alex. So I do something similar, well, pretty much that exact thing, except I do a little bit more to it. So Dave makes these really amazing flowers, and, well, the butterfly one is what I'm thinking about. He made this really amazing butterfly, and I saw him one day doing that technique, but then he took the piece to the cold shop and ground it into a very particular shape. And before that, what I was doing for my mice is I would do this, and then I would peel it away with a rod, and I wasn't getting those really thin edges like I wanted. So that's what I do now, is I'll blow a bubble. I'll actually demo that in a minute. And then it'll look like this, kind of messy. And then I'll bring it to the cold shop, and I have a little flat lap, and I'll just grind it down to this shape, which I found that I don't want it to just be like a rainbow shape. I like one side to be a little bit more tapered than the other. That's something I started doing the past month. I don't know It's one of those things that, like, I've been doing this for years and I don't know why I haven't been doing this for years, but it's so obvious now. So I'm going to take these ones that I did cold work and I'll curve these up into the ear shape. Side note, what I do after I make it is I will put it in the kiln and anneal it too, because I found if I don't, like an actual anneal cycle, if I don't, it loves to crack and break in the cold shop, which is no fun when you make 10 ears and you get 2 out of the 10. So annealing is important. So I'm going to curve these guys up.
So do you anneal it before you flat lap and after you flat lap?
Just before.
Just before.
Yeah. So I'm going to use a 6 mil rod. I thought when I first started doing these, I wanted to use like a skinny rod so it had less of a touchdown, but it's not enough support. So a 6 mil is perfect. Generally, I always have like 3, 4, 6, and 8 mil on my desk. I'm going to punty to the middle of it. I'm not worried too much if it's like a perfect cold seal or perfect hot seal, because it doesn't really matter at this point. So it's really thin. Once you guys get the piece, you'll see I actually had to find a balance of like, I thought I want it to be as thin as humanly possible. That doesn't work well. It likes to break very, very easily, and also the color doesn't hold up as much. This color is my favorite pink. It's the Paramore Flamingo, or Cuff Flamingo, I think he calls it. And I use that for all my Meissen wraps. I used to also use an opaque pink that Molten Aura made, but they don't make it anymore. So I'm heating really, really gentle because it heats up so fast. If you guys have questions about stuff, like, please holler it out. You don't want to overheat or else it will thicken up on me. So even though this flame's pretty hot, I'm going in the area of it that isn't hot. So I kind of go back and forth, work in each side to curve them over. And then I get those 2 points to touch a little bit, and then I want to make sure they seal together. All right. So it looks pretty good, but it's still like really static. So I'm going to use my handy reamer to remedy that. The other thing I have to remember, which I almost forgot to remember, is which side is which. So which was the side that was more sloped. On this one, I have it this way, so I'm going to put this one down, knowing which way it needs to go. That's right. So a nice gentle heat, and I'm going to go in and kind of just pull out those edges a little bit. And push down that curve there too. Sometimes when I do this, if I manhandle the glass a little, it'll crack, but sometimes I love when it does that because then it gets that little like cut, like the rat maybe got into a fight or something. I think one of these rats has that. I tried to intentionally make that happen with no success yet. So again, I would normally be like a lot more finicky with these, but I won't make you guys suffer through that. So it looks pretty good. I'm just gonna flash my tweezers, and I'm going to melt off this back end. I don't mind if it takes a little bit of it with it, and then I'm going to flip it and flatten this side. And I also don't mind if this side gets a little thicker as I do this. I modified this process a lot. I used to curve them and get the shape and then anneal them and then bring them back in the cold shop again and grind the bottom off to match the curve of like the rat or, well, the mouse's head then. But then the inside of the ears was just white, and I didn't like that. I wanted like some of the pink to carry to the inside too. So that looks pretty good. Do the same thing to the other one. it's not uncommon for me to, when I'm working, to like go back and forth between flame shop and cold shop a lot. That's why it was kind of hard for me at first when I got invited to this demo to figure out how to make something from beginning to end, because generally I'll take a piece out and look at it and live with it for a while, make some decisions on it before I go further. I'm trying to remember which way this goes. And the ears are definitely one of those things, so sometimes I'll wait till the piece is cold and then I have my little Tupperware thing, my little organizer full of like different size ears, and then I can pick which ones go best. And it's fun to play with the ear size because it gives them so much personality. And apparently like the position of their ears tells a lot about how the rat's feeling. Like that's something I read recently. I don't know how true it is. So I'm going to seal that in. And now the hard part, again, making two things match. And these are so thin, they cool off really quick. Like this is warm, but it's not too hot for me to pick up. I considered going like one step further and trying to give them like that little, sometimes they have like little red veins and stuff in their ears, but I think that would be just too much. All right, not perfect, but good enough. Before I put it in the kiln, the ears, I want to hold them up to the piece, or the rat, well, I'll probably just use these anyway, but I usually hold them up again to see how they look. And I have a little tool that I use to put the ears in. Is it over there? Little tray tool.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Very useful.
Yes, I love this tool. I had this little piece for something else and I was trying to figure out how to make this exact handle and I was kind of stumped, and then Dave was like, well, just make a handle that's a U. And it works perfectly because now it doesn't roll, it's nice and stable, it has a flat bottom. So when I'm ready, I'm going to put these pieces in here and I'll put this in the kiln so I can take it out and have them stay nice and toasty while I'm working on it. I assume this will work for a lot of other things. I know a lot of people will do things where they kind of take a tube and cut it more like a little boat shape, but I think this works really good for my purposes. Can you grab the rat for me? It's just Boro. Yeah. Wait.
What?
I lost my swivel. Thank you.
Huh?
So now I'm gonna go back to the back area and I'm gonna work on the back legs. So before I do the back legs, I'm gonna map it out a little bit. So I'm gonna use my tweezers or a similar tool, again, just to make a little mark that will help me know if that's right. And I'm, again, thinking about where the spine is, where the hip is, how that comes up, and then the knee comes down. So I think right there is where I want it to be. And I have my reference images to look at too. That looks good. Then we try and get a matching spot on the other side. So it's just like a tiny little dimple. If you guys can see that, but it's a really light mark that shows me what I'm going to do next. I'm going to use another 6 mil puntito or puntetto or whatever you want to call it. Although I like the word puntito, it's pretty cute. So I'm going to heat up, again, a wider area than I think. That's something that took me a while to figure out how to do. I feel like I was always underheating the area. Like you might want one spot really hot, but I think it's good to heat all the stuff around it too so they move together, so there's not really any abrupt lines. And I'm having my blow hose ready because when I do this pull, I want to puff a little too. And I'm keeping an eye on that mark because it starts to get very faint because obviously I'm heating it up. So I'm going to push and I'm going to pull a little bit in the direction that I want it to go and puff a little. Now I don't want these to be like really long. And if I wait long enough, this can just snap off. Sometimes I melt it off. So this is like the little nub. And we do that same thing on the other side. Keep a nice wide area, wider than you think. And I'm going to pull in the direction that the foot's going to go. And again, notice I switch sides, so I'm holding it at this angle. When I go to pull, I'll have to switch because, again, I'm a righty. I want my punty to be warm, but not hot. If it's too hot, it'll just kind of like, you know, if it's really hot, it'll pull out instead of the piece pulling out. And if it's just a little too hot, then I won't be able to do that like little wiggle snap I did to make it come off. But that's okay because you can just melt it off too.
That wiggle snap doesn't open a hole up in the light.
Say that again?
The wiggle snap doesn't open up a hole.
No, because the piece is like pretty thick. If it was thin, then probably, yeah. I think that's one of the things that was really hard figuring out with hollow sculpting is like how much material I need and where to put that material. And I struggled with it a lot. I think my whole New Year's resolution was to like understand wall thickness better. Like that whole year, I would just make stuff trying to think about wall thickness and where it goes. And when I do really complex positions, even with the mice, I have to think about that a lot. So what I did there is I'm trying to get that little carve going, and I'm using this graphite butter knife tool. I love this tool. And I'm also going to puff a little bit when I do that. I don't want like hard lines, but I want some lines there, some definition. And I tried a bunch of different ways with this, like do I want to do the pull before or after I do these lines? I find that doing them before is helpful and works better. And when I'm carving in a line, I'm not like drawing it on, I'm more like rock the tool. So that's why the curved side of this tool is really great for that. So start in the line I already did and I rock it. So if I have a line already started like there, and I need to extend it, I'm not just gonna heat here and then draw there. I'm gonna heat some of the line that already exists, the area I wanna go to, start in the area that's cold so I have something rigid to hold onto it and then like rock into it. So I'll do that one more time so you guys can see. I don't really need to, but I'll do it so you can see it. So starting there and then rolling. I'll make the other side match. I was thinking about what kind of heat I want to get when I'm doing this. Like, do I want, like now that I'm going to carve a little bit back here, I want that heat to be a little different than this heat. This heat I want it to be a little bit softer so it had like kind of a puff on either side. On this opposite side, I want more of a sharper line. So I might even switch tools. We'll see how this one works. I'm going to heat a little bit harsher, a little bit more of a surface heat, and then I'll carve that in. I'm careful again not to overheat here or here too much because here will want to crack and here will make the whole thing move. It's pretty heavy. Sometimes I'll even go back in and pull those feet out again depending on the position I want. I think here instead I'm actually going to heat the outside and kind of pat those in a little bit. When you're sculpting, it's just like series of decisions you have to make, and with glass we have to make those decisions faster. When I'm sculpting clay, you can sit and look at it and think about it and make those decisions. Like, you know, it can take you a day to make a decision, and then you put a blob of clay on. Here I have to make that decision now. But again, to kind of mitigate that, what I'll do is I'll sculpt things to a certain level of finish, and then I'll live with it on my desk and look at it and hold it and make decisions then light up my torch and then, you know, get it hot, do all those changes I wanted to make. So I want to curve that back out a little bit more. He's looking a little skinny to me. So I'm going to build up some heat here and let that back curve out a little bit more. I'm a little nervous about up here, so I'm going to not touch that too much with the fire. Again, when I'm at home, I have like lots of time, so at any point I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'll put it inside the kiln and I'll think about it. I might take it out and look at it and compare it to my reference images. It helps to work on more than one at a time and kind of decide on like one position and do that a bunch of times, so you're not giving yourself like more issues to deal with. So the standing rat was the first one that I did, so I have like, I think 5 of those at home maybe. And each one has its own problems. So that's a little better, but I know when I pull out these front arms, it's also going to change how I view the whole thing. So I might wait to do more of this after I can see that together. All right, where'd Alex go? Can you put this in the kiln for me, please? Thank you. You guys have any questions about that stuff so far? All right, so the front legs is coming next, and then the eyes and the nose. So I have to prep stuff for that. So when I pull out the front legs, I had, like I mentioned earlier, it's one of the hardest things. There's a lot of hardest things. And I found that what works as a puntito rather than an actual punty rod, I won't use a 6 or an 8 mil. Instead, I'm going to use a tube. And I was like killing myself trying to figure out how to make the front arms better. And it kept me up at night trying to figure this out. And I watched a bunch of videos on Corning's website, other glassblowers working. And I had the idea for the tube, and I was like, oh, I'll try that tomorrow. And then I came across a video of Jason Johnson and Karen Willenbrink, and they were sculpting a dog in the hot shop. And he used tweezers to heat an area, and then he kind of pulled out a little circle and then used diamond shears to pull. And I was like, yes, that's exactly what the tube's gonna do. It's gonna grab like a circle rather than a point, and it will get me like a wider point of pull, and it works really great. So I found a 9.5 works awesome. So I'm gonna clean up the end of 2 of these, one for each front paw or foot, leg, whatever. I'm just kind of flame polishing these and make sure the end is nice and neat and ready to go. It's the worst when you're in a moment and you need your tool and you can't find it. So that's another thing that's awesome about doing things in steps, is when it's in the kiln, I can kind of mentally and physically prepare for what I'm going to do next. So I know this is what I'm going to do next, and I'm thinking about what other tools I need. And also while it's warming up, I'm going to prep the eyeballs. So I've been using, this is Elvis, extra or light Elvis. There's one red I have, I don't know if I brought that one, where the eyes are even redder than those ones, and I don't know what red I use, so I need to do a little experimental things to try and find a red that's a little bit lighter than this, or maybe I'll mix some clear with this one. So I'm going to prep some eyeballs, and I'll even do this with the mice, believe it or not, even though they're really, really tiny eyeballs. A lot of people think the red eyes are creepy. Do you guys think the red eyes are creepy? I think they're cute. So I'm just gonna pull out a little, I guess like a stringer here. I'm never sure exactly what size I want the eyes to be. In the last few I made the eyes a little bigger than I wanted, because when I first looked at them, that looks good, but then when I put them on, they would squish out like a little bit and be a little bit bigger than I wanted. So I gotta find that happy medium of just the right size. Looking for a 6mm, it's not super long. So this looks clear right now, but as I'm sure most of you know, it's a striking color, so it will strike and look nice red. So I have this little piece I broke down. Now I'm just gonna punty to the other side. And it is like a really small hot seal. And then I'm gonna split this in half and melt them down. And then I'll try and figure out how to match them up or see if they're the right sizes. Usually takes me a little bit of tweaking. Or I'm gonna have these set aside so when I take out the rat on the next move, I can look at it and decide if these eyes are too big or too small, and I can fix them. So it's like a really tiny hot seal. I found, and you guys will see in a minute, when I put the eyes on, I like to have a little bit of like strength there so I can push them into place. If it's a cold seal, it's nice when it goes in, it snaps off very easily, but sometimes it snaps off too easily without me being able to like push it into the position that I want, especially that second eye, because the first one can go on great, but the second one never goes on perfect. So you need to have a little bit of strength there to do some last minute tweaks. And because all you watching, this one's probably gonna have really janky eyes, but that's okay. Those are pretty good. So sometimes I leave them round and I can't decide which way I like better, and sometimes I flatten the back just a little bit. And I started doing this on the last two that I made, and I think I like this. So every time I make a thing that I'm working on, I kind of alter it a little bit to see if something's better. Sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. All right, so I got little eyeballs. Sometimes I'll have one of my finished ones next to me that I like the eyes on so I can size them up and see. So that's pretty good. So I'll set those aside. Because they're so small, I don't need to like preheat them in the kiln or anything. What I'd like to do with the nose, and I won't do that today, is I will anneal the whole piece before I finish it, and then I bring it to the cold shop, and I'll use a little sintered diamond bit on my Dremel, and I cut a line in the middle and then two little lines going this way, and then I'll heat it up again and kind of get in the nostrils, and it gets me that, if you ever looked really close at a rat nose, it has those little cut lines. And I found when I carve them in at the torch, all I'm doing is like pushing material from one place to the next. So if I can completely remove the material, it helps. So with these colors, you do have to be a little bit gentle, but I love all the Paramore colors. I'm really into like opaque pastels these days, if you guys can't tell. So I don't want it to be like too thin. That looks pretty good. Right. So planning for the next time it comes out of the kiln, I have my two 9.5 tubes for the front legs. I have this for the nose. I have my eyes that I can size up. I may or may not add the eyes on depending on like how they look. So Alex, you grab that for me? Wait, forgot this again. The glove really is a game changer because it's warm up here, but I can hold on to it with my glove. And I'll usually like use my bridge too, this bridge post that's left over, as a point to know how far back I can pull it out of my kiln so I can hold it as high up as possible. So this one's a little bit hot up here, but that's okay. All right, so next move is the front legs. So I'm gonna build up a little bit of heat, and I'm gonna do those marks like I always do. I gotta find my tweezers. I don't know about you guys, but tweezers is the #1 tool that I constantly lose. So I found with the back legs, I'm gonna look at my reference images here, because I kept messing them up where I was starting them either too far back or too far forward, depending on the position. But the one that's coming up, I'm gonna start further up than I think because it makes more sense of how it's gonna pull out. And the one that is down is gonna start further back. So they're not gonna be lined up perfect. One's gonna be a little more forward than the other. But I can line them up in this direction of how they're gonna go. So we'll make this one the down one. Just a little mark. Same thing with this side. And you can see that this one's a little more forward. All right. Now I got my little puntito ready to go. And I'm gonna build up some heat. I'm gonna have my blow hose ready to go because I am gonna need to puff as I go. I'm gonna double look at it so I can remember which arm does which. This one I'm gonna heat and I'm gonna pull down, and I'm gonna try and match it up with this back leg. You can always tweak it after, but it's nice to do it right on the first try if ever possible. So I'm heating a little and then I'm coming out and I'm hanging out and I'm letting that heat like really sink in. I want a big wide area hot, but I don't want one area soupy. And I will puff out a little bit too to give me a little bit more poop, but also for me to test how hot it is. Starting to lose my mark, but I remember where it is. This one's a little bit thicker than I normally work, so it needs a little bit more heat. All right, I'm gonna go for it on this next one. Make sure this is nice and warm. I'm gonna touch it down, push in a little, and then pull. I'm gonna blow a little as I pull. And I'm looking from all directions because it's really easy to make it look good from the side, but not from the front. And sometimes these snap off, but if I snap off, it's not always as clean, so I found that melting it off is easier anyway. I'm going to use another rod just to peel off that extra clear. Building up a little heat while I think about my next move. That leg looks pretty good, but it's not perfect yet. But before I tweak it and do the other one, I'm gonna carve in this back line because looking from this direction, it's a little bit more center than I want it to be, so I wanna shift it this way a little bit. So here I not only carved in that line, but I tried to push the whole arm out. I do want it a little bit more center just so he has that nice balance. Because he has that front paw kind of here while the other one is up. When I carved that line in, I'm starting at the line I already created and just kind of carrying it over. Wrong side. Keeping it warm while I think about what to do. The end of this arm's like a little bit sloppy, so I'm going to clean that up right now. I'm going to get a gentle heat and kind of neaten up the outside of it. pretty good. So I make sure it matches up. Right. So I'm going to prep for the second arm, and that one I'm going to kind of pull upward. So same thing, except I'm going to pull forward and out. To figure out these arms, actually I have this really, I should have brought it, this really crazy thing on my desk where I just had like a piece of this prepped down and I just pulled a ton of arms on it. And then I put a bunch of weird eyes on it too, so I can practice sculpting the eyes. Because when we're working on something here, like how many chances do I get to pull these arms? On each piece I get, 2 chances, one each arm. But on a piece of scrap I can pull like 8 arms on it. And also when we're working on our piece, the further along, the more precious it becomes and the more careful we are. And then you won't try different things. All right, just about ready. Push in and we'll pull out. You pull slower than you think. I feel like this is the point where it really starts to look cute. This rat's kind of skinny though. We might need to make him a little chubbier. So I'm going to carve in the line behind the leg. When I'm sculpting, I find myself holding the glass in like the weirdest positions to do what I need to do. And another thing I do too is I always tell my students about like dinosaur arms if I'm doing like really detailed things, but you can't really do that when you're here. But what I can do is when I go to carve a line in is brace myself like on myself. And that keeps me from being shaky or missing my target, because I have been known to do both those things. I'm going to make this arm a little bit shorter so it matches the second one. So when I was practicing for this demo and like trying to figure out how to do this in the amount of time I had, I really found I could push how long this is out of the kiln for further than I thought I could. Like this is out of the kiln longer than I normally would. So as usual, the front legs are giving me a little bit of issue, but I'm not going to be too finicky. Normally I'll spend a little bit more time, maybe have it come out of the kiln a couple more times until I get these arms right, but they look pretty good. All right, so while I have it out, I'm going to build up some heat in the face and try to map that out a little bit. Make sure I'm on track. So I'm looking for this really thin blade knife so I can carve in the mouth. And this heat, I don't want that wiggly heat. I want a really good surface heat. And it's important to get this center, so before I actually do it, sometimes I use this to hold on to it. I'll make a little dot and look at it to make sure it's centered. It's really easy to have things like shift to one side because you're always holding it in one hand. It's pretty good. So now I'm going to get another one of those kind of sharp heats and get his little mouth in there. When I'm carving in this mouth, I'm carving in like the two mouth lines, and I'm carving them in and pushing in a little too, so that middle part has a little more chin, I guess, if mice have chins, or rats. And then wherever like a line ends like that, I don't like to have it just end. I like to kind of give it a little tug with a tungsten pick. So I'm going to warm up the tungsten pick just a little bit so it's sticky, and then get it into that corner and give it a little pull. Just makes it feel a little bit more finished. So now it's starting to have a little face going. So I'm going to draw on a little nose. Again, what I normally do with the noses is I'll draw them on and keep them just the drawing, just a line or a little rectangle on there. And then I'll bring it into the cold shop and grind it away and pick it up again. But we'll just keep this one simple for today. So bracing myself on myself. And this one has some wiggle room too. And I made that little ledge because the noses, for a while I was making them different, and then I looked at the picture and I was like, wait a second. The pink of their nose doesn't come on top. It's actually underneath. I'm used to making the noses a little bit bigger than I want them to be, knowing that I'm going to cold work it later. And I still could cold work this one later too, even when I do finish it. Because I usually sandblast them, so any roughness from the cold working could be ground away. Alright, so more mapping it out. I'm going to use this little tool here in a minute to kind of push up a spot for where the eyes are going to go. If I'm ever looking for a tool, you know it's my tweezers. So I'm going to mark where the eyes go, and this is another make it or break it point. If you put the eyes somewhere wrong, it's wrong. But what I look for when I'm mapping that stuff out, let me find one. Like on this drawing here, I found that, this is where the cheek comes, and I kind of draw on top of my reference image, which helps a lot for me to see where things go. So I find that cheek curve and I'll follow it up, and I make a little dot. That looks pretty good, and I'll try and match that on the other side. This might even be something I like if I get this to a certain level of finish and it's on my desk and I'm ready to work on it again, I might draw on it with Sharpie, or I'll even use some clay and I'll build on things with clay too, just so I can see it before I actually do it. So it's kind of funny looking. All right, so I got his little eyes mapped out. I'm gonna use this little tool here. It kind of has like a little edge to it. I'm gonna start on the harder side and kind of heat and push up a little. Give myself a little pocket. This is something I've only done on the last two that I sculpted. And I was nervous that if I did this, it might make them look mean. So let's hope it doesn't make them look mean. Alright. And while we're here, I'm also going to size up the eyes and make sure they're good. Looks good to me. And then I'll size up the ears too. Kind of big, but that's cute. Right. Put this in the kiln for just a couple of minutes. How we doing on time?
You're doing great.
Okay.
Keep going.
All right, so next I'm going to put the eyes and ears on. So I'm going to put the ears inside this little guy and put this in the kiln. It doesn't take long for it to get nice and hot. Thank you. All right, cool. So I'm going to prep for the next thing. Awesome, I have notes because or else I wouldn't know what to do. So while those ears are getting warm in the kiln, I know that my next move is to finish the face and add the ears. What the face is going to need is it's going to need eyes, which don't need to go in the kiln, but they're done. I'm going to need the ears, those are heating up, and I'm going to need to put on little whiskers. So for the whiskers, like I mentioned before, if you look at this guy here, or these two, I tried something new where I took it when it was just about done and I brought it in the cold shop and I used a really pointy sintered drill bit on my Dremel and I carved in every single one of those holes, which was very time consuming. And then I flame polished it all before I added the eyes and ears. And I like it, but I don't love it. I actually like more when it's softer. And actually what I did on this one too, a little bit different, you guys can come look at these closer after, is I saw that sometimes it looks like where their whisker lines are, it's kind of like lines and then holes. So this one I carved little lines in and then drilled little holes. They're not all the way through. Although another thing I did try, when I first started making these, I thought it would be really awesome to put whiskers on them. So I've been hoarding my cat's whiskers every time I find them on the floor. And I tried drilling really teeny holes all the way through and put cat whiskers in, but it didn't look good at all. I thought it would, but it doesn't. But I still like the cat whiskers. So what I fell back to is actually years and years ago when I started making the mice, a friend of mine made this tool for me. She just carved it out of an old file, and on one side it has 3 little spikes that are really close together, and I use that for the mice. And on the other side it has little spikes that are has 4 spikes that are a little bit bigger, so that's what I'll use for the rat. And I've had this forever, and it works great. I feel like that was a hard decision of like how much detail do I want, and I think that was too much. I don't know what you guys think, but I think it was too much. So I'm going to clean up my desk a little bit, only have out what I need. I remember when David and I years ago took a class with Elio Carissa at Corning, and when we're working on stuff, he would come over and take everything off your bench except the 1 or 2 tools that you need. And I really took that away because it was like, it's really helpful. In the moment, you can't be like fumbling through your tools. And I see a lot of people on like Instagram, I'll be scrolling and their desk is just like covered in stuff. I don't know how you guys work like that. So, not that I'm perfect, but my desk can be messy, but you need to have only what you need out when the time comes. So I'm gonna set that out so I know what I have next. All right. Where did Alex go?
Yeah.
Normally I'd leave it in a little bit longer, but I think we'll just go for it. I did anticipate that I might mess up, so there's 2 more rats in there. One that only needs a tail, and then one that's sculpted to the point where this one is. Just in case I messed up. Or like, what's Sally's mantra? Please don't break, please don't break. All right, so eyes and ears. I like to do the eyes before I do the ears or the whiskers because the eyes are the hardest and I can use them as a reference to make everything match up. So what I found with doing the eyes is I like to do this one first because when I do the second one, I can look at it this way and do my tweaks. So I want to make sure the eye itself is warm and the spot it's going into is pretty hot. And I gave myself a good landing spot so I know exactly where to go. Doesn't mean I will actually hit the target because I'm really terrible at that. So that spot's really nice and hot and I can put the eye in there and then I'll push up. You can see I'm like rotating a little. I might mess this up because I'm trying to show you guys. And then kind of like, so that way it pushes up that brow a little bit. And then if that were a cold seal, it might wiggle, snap off. It might still snap off. We'll melt it off just to be safe. But again, I like that stability of being able to like put the eye in and not just go in, but like rotate a little so it pushes out that brow. The eyes are one of those make it or break it moments in the piece, because it's really hard to repair it if I mess them up. Go for the second eye. Before I do it, I like to kind of mime out my moves. Like I'm looking at it to make sure those markings that I made work out. Like this one's a little further back than I planted this eye. Like if I planted this eye not on my exact spot, then I know I can try to be as equally off on the second one. So it's a little more forward than the marking that I have. So that's what I'm going to try and do. And I can't heat from the other side, or I can, but then I have to move because I need to have that like precise hand that I can only have with my right hand. This one's warm. The spot where the eye's going really hot. I'm trying to set myself up with that like nice firm grip. And then I'll come here and try to match it up. Because I only get like just this second, for a couple seconds, to do little tweaks. This one will snap off. Pretty cute. Alright, so I have 3 different tungsten picks because I like to use a really skinny one for this point. And you can see in this reference image that I have, like which corner, like what direction I want to pull the corners of the eyes in. I played around with doing that where I would actually like grab some of the red of the eye and pull it, and I didn't like that. I feel like it's too much. So instead I kind of just give a little gesture of that on the corner where like they connect, that little edge. So I have to look at my reference image again because I kind of forget. And again, heating more than you think. Tungsten pick, the only tool that goes in the fire, right? And I'm gonna grab that little corner and just like a really gentle pull, and then I also like lay it down. And I wanna do that again. You can always add more, but you can't really like undo it if you do it wrong. All right, I'm gonna do that same thing, but to the bottom corner of the eye. And this also gives me, like I was saying before, when I do the whiskers in a minute, I'll know where this is pulling so I can make the whiskers go towards that point. So pull and then lay it down. Now the hard part, making the second one match. And while I'm here, I'm noticing so many other things. Like I did that move on the cheeks where I used that tool, and I can see I have a little bit of tool mark there, and also the cheek is a little bit flat. So I'll probably go back in and puff that out a little bit, because one of my favorite teachers at Mass Art told me there's no flat spots in life. So I want to poof those out a little bit. So while I'm here, I'm going to give that cheek the little puff that I want to give it. I'm careful not to heat that eye too much, but I'm also careful not to let it get too cold, because now I have kind of like broken that rule in boro or glass where I have a connection or a little edge that's less than a right angle. Like that's a really tight area. So if it's going to want to crack now, that's where it's going to want to crack. Although this white glass is really weird. Like I know it pretty well, but sometimes it does really weird stuff. Like I had a piece the other day, I don't know what I was doing, but it just got a tiny crack in a spot I would never expect it to crack in. But thankfully, I was able to repair it. With these rats, on pretty much every single one of them, there's something I had to repair. And you guys know glass, so you know that glass breaks. It's not what you can make, but it's what you can fix. All right, so that's a little better. I'm gonna get those whiskers in there, and then the ears. So with the whiskers, actually before I get the whiskers, I'm remembering that I didn't poof out the little, what I call the muzzle. I don't know if that's really what it's called. So I'm going to heat up over here a little bit and just give it a little puff. Same thing on the other side. Alright, so looking at my reference image, I'm trying to decide like where the whiskers go. So I look for the edge of the nose, the corner of the eye, and then I'm going to go down a little bit. And I want these to be subtle, but I want you to be able to see them. So I want to heat just the surface of the glass. So I'm going to nice focused flame. I'm going to have my tool ready to go. I'm going to brace myself like on myself or on my torch. Careful, sometimes your elm arbor can get quite hot. When I first got this, I burned myself on it so much. So I roll with this tool as well. And again, making the other side match. Before I fully go into it, I usually start by just marking a spot and deciding is that my starting point. Do it lightly and then decide if that looks good. And it's not right, it needs to go a little higher up. Pretty good. It's keeping the head warm. But when I took that class with Lauren Stump, he always talked about supply or deny. So when I take this out of the kiln, everything's kind of an even heat. And the area that I'm working is the area I'm supplying with heat and working with it, but I'm not going to flash heat anywhere else. If you guys ever get to take a class with Lauren Stump, he's an excellent teacher.
Waltham?
Yeah. All right. So I actually don't mark the spot for the ears. I just put on the first one and try to make the second one match. Flashing my tweezers. I have to get this into like a grip that's comfortable and holds it in the direction. So before I put it on, I kind of pretend to for a minute. I'm gonna make this flame nice and tight. This is gonna heat up really, really fast. It's super thin, right? So I want the hottest thing to be the spot I'm connecting it to. And once that's ready, then I'll start adding heat to this. But I don't really wanna go back in and fuss with it too much because it's really thin and I don't wanna risk messing it up. With the mice, this is even harder, I think, because they're small. So I have limited time in which I can like tweak it, and then it's done. That looks pretty good. I think I would have liked to put it on like 2 millimeters further back, but it's still good. I'm gonna get the other one set up. Perfect. All right. So when I go to put this second one on, what I'm looking for is my markers, is the opening, which way is it pointing? It's pointing a little bit further than that point on the eye. So that's gonna be my reference. And I'll start heating this little spot and then I'll look at it and make sure that's the spot I wanna heat. And I always have extra ears and extra parts because it's not uncommon for me to drop this and never see it again. But that happens, I'll rip off the other ear and put a whole new set of 2 ears because I make them match. My fingers are getting pretty hot. So here's like my 1 second of adjusting. All right, again, I have like half hour left. So normally what I would do is I would even fuss with all of this more. Like now that I can see everything together, I'll go in and kind of like tweak all the little things. But we won't do that here. All right, we'll get this guy in the kiln. And now we're gonna set up our feet. Shut this off, there we go. I have lots of feet here. I'm gonna hand out a few samples for you guys to check out. I tend to make the feet a little bit bigger than they actually are. And something I actually just started doing is put some little white here. I actually didn't do that in the one I'm gonna use. So I have some samples you can hand out. Thank you. And afterwards, when you guys come up, you're able to check out, I have this like whole little bin over there of feet I've been making for the last like 10 years. Like I always keep some from every run of them that I do. Because even though I've been sculpting the rats for a long time, I don't sculpt them like consistently. Can you put those in the kiln too, please? And can you also tell me which arm is the up one? When you look. Which one did I lift up, left or right?
I'll tell you, yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember. I need to know that.
Okay, which is?
Because I'm just gonna, both of the hands I start by having them just flat, but the one that's up needs to be a little relaxed. So
Left, right, like this in the kiln?
thumbs go in the inside.
Right.
Sure.
This way?
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
So I'm gonna prep these feet. So I'm gonna take them off this tube, or this rod I should say. I'll talk to you guys a little bit about the foot process, although it's ever changing. I found that when going from mouse feet to rat feet, it was not as easy as the transition as I wanted it to be, because I thought I could just make a bigger mouse foot, but now that it was so much bigger, I could fit way more detail in there. So you can see when you guys come up here later and check it out, this one has sort of the first rendition of their rat feet where they don't have knuckles. But one of the things I really liked about their feet were that they had those really gnarly knuckles. When I started sculpting them, I also found that I was over sculpting them and that the feet were looking like too gnarly, so I had to like soften it out. So what I do to make the feet is I'll make the base form, like this center form here. And then instead of adding little dots like I did with the mouse foot and pulling those out into the toes, I'll actually have these little jars, and this one says back feet because these are a little bit thicker. So it has all of these little toes in there, or yeah, toes, fingers, whatever they are. And I'll put these all in little punties and I'll connect those one at a time, and then I'll bridge them together so that I'm able to pull out the knuckles one at a time. And you'll notice too, they all have little fingernails, and that's actually my favorite part. And I have another one of the back feet I can hand out as well. I'm gonna pass these ones around. You guys wanna come grab these? You pass these ones around too?
Show off your magnifier?
Oh yeah, sure. Another thing I do is I use this a lot. It's super cool, and this was definitely an upgrade. Dave has all these studio upgrades I'll see him using, and I'm like, I need that. So I'll just steal it from him, and this is one of his tools that I stole. It's great. If you can't see it, you can't sculpt it. This is absolutely necessary with the mice and totally necessary with the rat feet. It leaves a really cool, awesome red stripe across your forehead when you use it for the whole day, but it's really cool. And I actually will often not wear my ditties when working with these. I'll just wear clear glasses because the flame is so tiny. I'll work on one of these with maybe like a number 5 or a number 4 tip. And I have like detailed notes that tell me like what torch tip I use for what when I'm doing it. So this is a game changer. I think it's like $15 on Amazon. Highly recommend. And then I'll prep a tail as well and have that ready to go. So with the tails, I don't really like that one. You can kind of look in the core of it. I'll pass one of these around. We'll use this one. In the core of it, I use some of the same white because I know from experience with that white, it does not love clear. So I use a core of the white and then I roll it in Silver Strike 5 Frit just to give a little bit more of a like brownish fleshy tone. Because if you look at rats, their tails actually aren't really pink. And then I cover it in the pink and I'll pull that out. But it just gives that little undertone, especially towards the tip. So I'm gonna put a punty on the end of that one so I can get it in the kiln so it's ready when I need it. Color is kind of a crazy thing to me too, because for a long time there wasn't all the amazing colors that there are now. And I feel like I'm still learning all about them. And I don't always have a use for all those really crazy colors, except when I started doing the little finger monsters. I brought a couple samples of those. That's when I was like, oh yes, I can finally use all those crazy transparents that exist now. Or else there's nothing else I make that I want a fluorescent orange for, but for those, I need a fluorescent orange. Kiln, please. Awesome. Can you hand me the foot that's going to be the up foot?
The up foot?
Yeah.
Left?
Alex helps me a lot with this stuff. His station is right across from me. So I usually be like, Alex, what are you doing right now? You want to hand me feet? So I'm going to actually just relax this one a little bit because it's really flat. So I'm just going to give it a little bit more flatting. I would normally put on the magnifying glasses for this too, but I just don't want it to be really rigid because it's, going to be up. So I imagine their hands doing something, relaxed. I don't want to melt off those little fingernails, 'cause that's the best part. And I could spend an hour doing this, but I'm not going to. All right, that's good enough. So to prep it to attach it, I'm actually going to put a tiny, tiny little hot seal on the bottom. So I'm flashing the bottom of those little foot pads. And I'm going to heat just the very tip and touch it down gentle and then pull out and bend a little. So it's a very tiny hot cold seal, if that makes sense. Because it will snap off like a cold seal, but it went on hotter than a cold seal would. I'm going to detach that one and remove any clear that's left over. All right, so now this one's gonna go in the kiln, and this is where it has to be like really gentle, because even just like one tap and this whole thing will just be on the floor, which is no fun. I'll switch with you. Thank you. I always give Alex the really scary jobs. So same thing on this side, but I'm gonna let this one stay flat. Right, and remove any of the clear that I don't need.
Back ones?
Yes. And I've been playing around with like getting the hands to look natural has been a little tricky too. I've been playing around with a few different things. Sometimes I'll add a little bit of white there. One of the samples that's being handed out has some white on the top. I go back and forth whether I like that or don't like that. So you might see some rats with it and some without. I'll have a back foot, please.
Ja.
So the first pair of feet I'm going to connect, I'm going to do the back feet, and I'm going to use my hornet tip for that. And then I'm going to do the front feet, and before I do that, I'll switch out the tip to probably like a number 5 or so.
Righty.
This one is
Lefty.
a righty. With the back feet, it's really subtle, but one of the like side toes, the pinky's longer than the thumb. But they don't really have thumbs. But we can call it a thumb. So I'm thickening up the end of this a little bit, knowing that that's going to be like the main part that's connected to the body.
Righty.
I'll take the other foot. Thank you.
Lefty.
All right, same thing. Kind of a hot, cold seal.
I still feel it. I think it would be.
This is where in my head I'm just like, careful, Trina, careful, careful. Because I do really like small, detailed works, but I'm probably one of the clumsiest people you'll meet. So now I'll get the rat out on the next one, and we'll attach his back feet. I need a paddle that's big enough that's going to be able to touch like all the feet at once. All right.
One right over my hands.
Oh.
Yeah. It's not that bad.
Right. So not touching anything except back there. I'll take a foot.
Back foot?
Left, back left.
Back left.
Yes, please. So it's really nice for like little stuff like this to have a little pickup kiln nearby.
70% confident that's back left.
It's fine. I want this to be a nice hot seal. We'll get it on there, and I'll come to this direction to make sure it's like not tweaked. And I still get to like tweak it and play with it after anyway. All right, I'll take the second one.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna get off that little punty mark that's there. Sometimes I forget to do that. Make sure that seal's worked in well. Sometimes I'll use my hand torch here. Sometimes I need it, sometimes I don't. And even though I'm not blowing, I tend to chew on my blow hose. Or sometimes I puff a little bit. Line those up as best I can. Again, doesn't need to be perfect here because I can tweak it later. This guy's feet are really big for him.
Those are big feet.
Yeah.
Got big old hoppers.
All right, I'm gonna work in that seal a little bit and then put this in the kiln for a sec so I can switch out the torch tip. This corner likes to crack, so this corner will get a little extra love. And then while I have it hot here, I'm gonna try and line those up a little bit. Just get a gentle heat on them. Line them up, knowing like where that front foot's gonna go. Right. Sneaking up on me. All right, so I'm gonna switch out the tip. I'll switch out the tip on my hand torch a lot, depending what I'm working on. When I'm working on the mice, I'll use like a number 4, sometimes a number 3 tip. When working on the rats, I switch it out between which foot I'm working on. I'm gonna work on a number 5. And I'll always test it out to make sure it's the one I remember that I want. That looks pretty good. All right, I'll take the rat again. And then I'll do like the flat foot first.
Flat foot first too?
Yeah,
You got it.
thank you. All right, so I'm not touching anything I don't need to work on right now. Thank you. I'm gonna see how this looks. Make a nice small flame. Try not to melt off any of my toenails. And then I'll use my hand torch to melt in that seal. And I'm going to make sure, or at least attempt to make sure, it sits flat-ish. That's pretty good. All right, I'll take that other one.
Can you talk about the difference in the torch tips?
Yeah, so depending what I'm doing, like I might want one that's a lot smaller and more focused.
Higher the number, the smaller?
Other way around.
Yeah, smaller number, smaller tip. And then the hornet tip, and I mean, no, there's other torch tips. In fact, I was actually talking about the other day that I think I need at least one more torch tip that's even hotter. So maybe I'll go shopping later and see what they have. Never have enough torches. Nope. We have a lot of torches. Yeah. That is how you guys, that's how we feel too at our studio. Dave is really good at collecting equipment, and I'm really good at using it, or learning to use it after he gets it. All right, so normally I'd put this in the kiln in between, but I'm just gonna, I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm gonna go back here. Please don't break, please don't break. And I'm gonna get in, make his little butthole. Because it's hollow and it can't be completely closed down, right? Ooh, it did break. That's okay. We'll get it. That's why we have backups. I know it has a crack in it now. That's okay. Sound like panicking. It's gonna work. Let's flash this and see if we can get that crack out. No. That's a big crack. All right, let's get this one in the kiln. We'll finish the other one. That might fall and break on you. That's okay. I have a backup plan. Yeah. So that's why you don't rush glass. Don't do that. So I have another one in there that I can take off, so I'm just going to use that one. I'm looking for my other glove. Nope. So I'm just going to prep my desk for that. I'm just going to move all this stuff out of the way. And on top of the kiln over here, I have a piece of graphite that I put there so it's nice and warm. It's not super hot, but it's nice and warm. And then I have my grabbers. These grabbers are actually just some tongs, and we use this, like, what is this stuff again? Huh? Well, the Kevlar tape, the stuff underneath it. Yeah, it's like the fiberglass thing. We got it like the AutoZone kind of place or Amazon. And then I wrapped it in the Kevlar tape because I wanted it to have a little bit more grip because I found the other stuff to be a little slippery. So this stuff, spark plug boot, that's what it is. But it's a little too slippery for this, so I wrapped it in this stuff too. It gives me a little bit more grip. All right, so hopefully this works out okay. Let's see. So I'll take that other one that's not cracked. Yeah, I'll take that one. I like this one better anyway. Right? All right, so he already has his little tungsten pick butthole. So I'm going to hold on to it, make sure I have a good grip. I got to find the nice safe grip. Oh, and I forgot, another thing I usually do here is I'll put like some Kevlar gloves under me in case it does drop. I have a crash pad. I'm actually just going to make my flame a little harder. So on the one you see climbing where his tail's facing down, that was really, really hard. And I want to do more of those, of course. This is where that like crash pad makes you feel safe, that I don't have. We already messed up once, so. I'm gonna clean up this end. In a minute, Alex is gonna bring you the tail. I'm gonna make sure it's gonna stand flat. All right, I'll take the tail, Alex, please. This one's set up a little bit weird. It's like I said, this is like one of the parts that I feel like I'm still really figuring out. Can you put the hornet tip on that, please,
Yep.
actually?
Can you light it?
I didn't have the best grip, so I'm switching my grip. There's always moments where you're like, oh no. All right. You melt off that bridge.
Yep.
Just taking a look at it while you melt off that bridge. And the point of the tail, I'll actually go back in when the piece is cold. Okay, there. Yep. I actually go back when the piece is cold and point up that tail a little bit. This is where I think I need a flame that's a little bit hotter than what I have. So I'm just working in this steel. And sometimes I've messed up where I've done this and then it didn't sit flat and I had to like heat up the whole thing again and pull it back out of the kiln and tweak it. And that's totally fine. Like if it doesn't stand right, I can always fix it. So I'm heating the tail and the backs. I want those to flow. And honestly, on every single one of these, there's always one spot on the tail that I'm like, it's not right. But each one's getting better. There's only so many times I get to try this because it's different when it's on the real piece. I only get to try it once every time I make one. This is about the time where my glass instincts are like, get it in the kiln. But I have to make sure it's right.
Cleared his little frack bed for him.
Yeah.
Ready to go.
So in the kiln waiting for him is a nice soft bed of fracks because, again, like I mentioned, I can be pretty clumsy and I've totally just put them down too hard and broke off all the toes, which is really sad, especially when it's like the last thing. So I'm just waiting for that tail to set up so when I do, I broke off the hand. That's okay, because I can fix that later, and I will. All right.
His ass fell off. The other one.
Oh, awesome. All right, cool. Thank you.
Don't mind, if you have some questions?
Yes,
Yeah?
please. Yeah, I'm sorry I broke it. I told you guys I was clumsy. It's real. And there's on every single one of these pieces, there's always one spot where I do something dumb and clumsy, and I just learn how to fix it. Every single one of them. And actually, when that kind of thing happens, I'll actually take that whole rat and I'll smash it so I can look at the wall thickness of it. Or I've done, actually I have it in my car, I'll get it later. I did another one where like the head was good, so I sawed off the head and put it on like one of those little plaques. So,
I just gave Angie his butt.
We have
yeah.
our first question over here.
Thank you for a very genuine, informative, wonderful demo. And I have a million questions, but the one I want to ask you is, you talked a lot about tweaking your process, changing how you attach things or what the eyes or whiskers look like, all those things. How do you assess and how do you feel about putting things out into the world, knowing that your process is always evolving as you move toward your next vision? Does that make sense?
It really does, yeah. And I think that it's usually this guy and that guy that tell me it's good and to just put it out there anyway. Because honestly, there's some of these that just still live on my desk and aren't in my head good enough. So is it ever good enough? But I think you have to trust the people you surround yourself with to tell you. and to be honest with you whether it's good enough or not. Because to me, it's never going to be good enough. I don't know if that's healthy, but that's how it is. I don't know if that answered the question.
I was wondering about the prep process and how long it usually takes on the lathe to get it to that shape, and then I'm just so curious about the wall thicknesses, which is why I'm holding this.
Yes.
And this might be like way too extra, but have you ever thought about making a prep and then like cutting a cross section to see
Yes.
exactly what it's like on the
I've
inside?
done
Or
that.
have you done it? Okay.
I've done that for
Makes
sure.
sense.
Or I'll even like open a big hole in it. I'll just do the prep that I want to sculpt with, and then I'll just sculpt the shit out of it and then like smash it to see what it looks like on the inside. Or I'll make it in clear first, because the first thing you should do is make it in clear, because you can see the wall thickness in that. Although it's really hard to sculpt clear because it's so reflective, so sometimes I'll roll it in a little bit of grit. But sculpting in clear is always a good first try, because you can see the wall thickness as it moves around. And when I'm doing those heats where I'm getting like the big gestures and moves, I can see if I'm overheating, if things are getting soupy and thickening up in different spots. And how long it takes on the lathe, I haven't timed myself yet. I'm still pretty new on the lathe, so probably longer than it would take someone that's good on the lathe. So I go really nice and slow to try and keep an even wall thickness. I'm sure it's not perfectly even, but for what I'm doing, it's fine. So that's still a work in progress for me. I would say maybe 45 minutes.
Something like that.
Yeah,
Probably a little less.
yeah, maybe like 40 minutes or so to kind of crunch it down and cover it and frit, and then I get it to this point where it has that nice. I did try once where I had like the head cut in, where I had another pull here, but I didn't like that because then I was sculpting, there was a tight spot here, so I wanted to start with more of like a blank when I came here.
All right. Well, I'm sure you're all anxious to get down here and check these rents out. So thank you, Trina.